All right, so welcome everyone to our second summer webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the front line of B2B media, content creators. I'm joined by two with a plethora of experience. Gwendolyn Wu, a senior reporter at Biopharma Dive, part of the Industry Dive / Informa Tech Target family, and Aja Kuzon, founder of Vault 29 social media agency and a graduate of Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism. Gwendolyn is also a McMaster Fellowship recipient, and she recently taught a class at Medill. Ladies, can I get a quick introduction from both of y'all?
Yeah, absolutely. Gwen, do you want to start it? Should I kick it off?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can kick it off. Hi, everyone. I'm Gwendolyn Wu. I'm a reporter at Biopharma Dive, senior reporter. That's weird to say now again. That was a promotion recently. Where I cover venture capital, biotech startups. So I specifically cover drug discovery and the way that new medicines are made. So really excited to chat today about just kind of the approach from a B2B standpoint to the work that I do.
Beautiful. Great to have you. Aja?
Hi, everyone. I'm Aja Kuzan. I'm the founder of Vault 29, and we are a B2B social media company. So we work with different professionals from different industries. Some of them are in the financial service industry. Some of them are realtors, healthcare professionals. So we get to work with a lot of cool different backgrounds and help them expand their reach on the internet and different social media platforms in ways that their audience probably wouldn't expect them to, share their expertise. So very fun.
Awesome. It's great to have both of y'all here. So for those that attended our first webinar, this is going to be very much the same sort of format, brief Q&A, 10 questions for both of our panelists. They'll answer both of them. If we have time at the end, we'll field a few audience questions. You can drop those in the Q&A chat once it opens up. Other than that, let's just jump right in. Our first question. So, as we know, B2B can also be described as niche media. So, what's it like creating content in a specialized niche? What makes it rewarding? What makes it challenging? I'll kick it to Gwendolyn first.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. I guess I should preclude this by saying I used to work in newspapers. So I was writing for a very general, very large audience. I did this in both San Francisco, where I'm, the Bay Area is currently where I'm based, as well as in the Houston metro area. So, very large, very big regional populations there, right? So switching to B2B media, where I'm very focused on an audience of investors, executives, scientists, is very different, right? Because all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm switching the way that I communicate what I'm writing about from, going from a very general, low level, audience to what I would assume is like a higher level audience. Frankly, a lot of the time I am writing for people who have more graduate degrees than I have. So it's really interesting to kind of think about just how do I best serve the audience at that point? They're not really asking the most basic questions. They may be asking more focused questions when they engage with the media that I create, right? So as I'm writing articles, I'm thinking, how do I explain this in a with the correct amount of scientific background? How do I give the people who are reading this the analysis that they're looking for? And it's an interesting element to try and incorporate into every piece that I work on.
Makes sense. Aja, what about you?
Yeah. There's always a learning curve, which is part of what's rewarding, and part of the challenge is making sure that in each different industry that we're covering, because we don't have to focus on just one certain type of topic or background. We work with different professionals and making sure that we're establishing them as experts within their industry. So we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we know exactly what we're talking about and what we're putting in the content and speaking to a very different audience than the general public. There is some level of a general audience when you're on social media, but we also do long form content and videography. So the recipients of that content are much more interested in the specialized, information that you wouldn't find just in a newspaper or on your local news channel. So challenging and rewarding, and there's always more research to be doing.
No, I completely understand that, especially for niche topics. Like I started out in sports and then I moved to climate coverage. Yeah. I knew nothing about climate coverage when I jumped into that. So like I kind of understand like, finding sources that you don't like have the best like connections with, it's incredibly tough, right? But there's also some of that like reward to it too. You know what I mean? Like you finally like establish a rapport with a topic that maybe you didn't understand, and now you slowly build up that knowledge to become an expert in that. Do you both agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which part of, I guess, what you're touching on now makes me think of another rewarding aspect of the job because we're working with specific clients and being able to capitalize on their own networks. I end up meeting so many people that I would never cross paths with. And one of the main clients that I work with, he's a realtor, a real estate agent, and he works in commercial industrial real estate. So a lot of the work that he does is very integrated into economic development as well. So it's not just investors that we're talking to, but crossing paths with other stakeholders and public officials and people that you wouldn't necessarily assume are interested or integrated in the real estate market. But yeah, very cool. Meeting people that I definitely would not come across paths on my own.
I get that entirely. Gwendolyn, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think that's a really good perspective to share in that. Like, I think for actually, maybe one thing is that when I used to write for a general audience, the concept was always like, everyone's coming from different walks of life. Everyone has a different goal or objective that they're trying to get out of engaging with content, right?
Mhm.
And so, when I'm writing now, I'm often writing with, in mind, okay, investors are using this to decide whether or not it's worth them investing in a business like this, or, helping to plan their businesses' decisions around whether to acquire something or whether it's worth pursuing a certain field of science, right? And so it's really, kind of interesting to go back after I've written something and ask, does this serve this purpose for our readership?
Totally understand that. Sounds good. Let's move right along. All right, so question two. So I'll start with Aja for this one. Are you involved in identifying content topics that drive high engagement, leads, subscriptions, event signups if you host events? I'm sure because you're the founder of your company, I'm sure you're a lot more involved in that now. But yeah, take me through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of the challenge with social media is that it's so overly saturated, of course. And now I think there's a shift happening of regular consumers going to social media to find, their dentist or their local real estate agent, that sort of thing. But that definitely wasn't the case even just a year ago. I think there's been a dramatic shift there. So trying to figure out exactly what content meets this intersection of regular social media engagement and also this informative expert information that we're pushing to their audiences. Um, Definitely also kind of falls hand in hand with the revenue aspect of figuring out ways such as the subscriptions or Substack, engaging in, setting up different workshops or webinars, that sort of thing for the clients that will increase a lot of the engagement that they have is based off of their local communities. So figuring out how to get actual people in the rooms is, probably a third of what I'm doing.
Makes sense. What about you, Gwendolyn?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think even though I don't have necessarily like a direct say in, say sponsored content or anything like that, right? I'm still working on, editorial opportunities that that also can help drive people over to the business side of what we do, right? I'm thinking about, okay, who are the best experts to get on a panel if I'm hosting a panel or a webinar of some sort? I'm thinking to myself, okay, like who is the best voice to get in here, and also making the editorial decisions sometimes on how to best promote that. If I'm working on a story about that features insights from a well-known investor in the biotech community, of course I'm going to want to put and promote that specific person's voice in a story, whether it's in the newsletter subject line, in the social media card shares, just to make sure that we get those eyeballs on the content. Obviously, like as a reporter, I love being able to say like so and so many people, read this, engaged with this, shared this. So, I'll argue as much as it is a good argument for the business side of things. It's also great for my ego when that happens.
No, totally. I guess when it comes to just follow up question with this, when it comes to sort of like this engagement, like what do you say, like a panel and like finding an investor like in biopharma, like you say, um, when you like bring them in, do you see like some sort of like measurable action to your content? Like say you hosted this panel with like a leading executive from like a pharmaceutical company. Do you like see that the engagement, like, oh, we're getting a lot more eyes on from their industry, also within the journalism industry itself? Like, do you see things like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's always noticeable, when we're like, oh, a certain industry leader has shared now this story that, we worked on that featured a particular voice on their LinkedIn, or, maybe we'll see like higher engagement, in the form of I'm getting more emails from PR leads that are like, hey, we read this, we saw this, so we're wondering if you want to focus on this. Doesn't always happen, but like I think that's a really good kind of like anecdotal way for me to measure whether it's having the impact that I want.
Makes sense. Oz, a similar question to you.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a little bit more actionable because you get like the likes, repost, reshare, stuff like that. Do you find that, in like your like clientele that you get a lot more like engagement when you have those sort of experts around or like in your social media?
Yes. And I'm really lucky in the sense that a lot of the work that we do is localized, depending on where these clients are based. So it's very easy to see where these people are coming from if they collaborate on a podcast with, a local law firm or something that's kind of an adjacent industry or market, to be able to see who these people are that are coming over from the other audience, whether it's internal customers, or just the external customers that are following their content, or going to them for their own services. Is it's actually pretty easy to see the correlation happening, and that's always converting over to the actual business aspect, and the sales, of course, of what they're promoting themselves, their service or their product. So it's very cool to see this sort of explosion happening of all of these different local businesses, especially if you're in a suburbia or larger metro area, and kind of the trickle down effect of like the kind of hub downtown area, and then how it is expanding into these smaller communities. So, yeah.
Very cool. All right, let's move right along. All right, question 3. So, what does your publication consider high value content? And I guess in Aj's case, more like what's your social media like consider high value content?
Hmm.
And how does that influence just editorial planning? But I guess in other sense, just like the social media planning. So I'll start with Gwendolyn for this one.
Yeah, I think obviously our bread and butter is to do stories, analysis, that kind of stuff, right? But I think particularly for us, having, I write for a publication that's been around for about a decade now, and so we're thinking about how it best resonates with readers in the industry. So a lot of that is okay if they're making these decisions about their company strategy, about spending, about how to invest their capital. We want to make sure that we provide them the information to do that as efficiently as possible. So, a couple things that we've launched in recent years, like, we do databases, tracking how much venture capital investment is going into certain fields of science, who is planning an initial public offering, an IPO right now, how mergers and acquisitions are playing out. We also do a lot of in-depth long form reporting, that kind of recaps like, we call them states of play, recaps a certain field of science. So like I did one earlier this year on targeted protein degradation, which is a certain field of medicine making right now that's being used to treat cancer in a new way, or immune diseases in a new way, right? I've had coworkers work on like, what is the next frontier for obesity drugs? Because we've seen the popularity of drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, and the GLP-1 field. And so it's like, when we know that we have these larger projects coming out, we can plan accordingly for like, how can we use this for lead gen, for example? Like, how can we use this to get more people to sign up for our subscriber lists? Like, and making sure that we have a regular cadence of those stories coming out is also helpful for us. So we don't have like, 3 long features, a database publishing all in the same month, and then it's like crickets for the rest of the year, right? So we're really
Mhm.
trying to be as mindful as we can of making sure that these come out on a regular basis so that our target audience wants to come.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure the database one is huge now, so they can just find something very easily just off, a Google search rather than like, oh, I gotta hunt through like 5 or 6 of these, talk to 5 different people. I'm sure that's, extremely valuable content for, your stakeholders, your readers. All right, Aja, now over to you. And
Yeah.
what's it more like on the social media side?
So there's probably two pots. There's the aspect of the community that we're cultivating that they've already kind of tapped into, and then there's the outside community that hasn't been exposed, or they've only been exposed kind of on that first level of the funnel. So for the latter, their high value content is definitely going to be visual. And we mix in long form and then short form, sort of YouTube shorts or the Instagram reels, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Their high value content is not as specific to the industry, but again, kind of those outside expertise, such as how to get involved in real estate or investment, even if you're not from that background. Whereas people who are already in that community that were trying to grow and then make sure that they stick around are more interested in the long form written content, the market reports, that sort of thing. Still very visual based when it comes to social media. But yeah, very two different approaches in terms of what content we're putting out. And of course, the cadence, like Gwendolyn said, is always very important, especially on social media, because it's very easy to track the metrics. So you see when when there's a dip, and you have to kind of pivot and figure out what is going wrong, or what people are interested in, and how to lean into that more. Um, so that's probably the most influential factor in terms of planning the content for the next month or the next 3 months.
Totally. And I totally understand the idea of like long form versus short form, especially now with like the videos.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's doing reels. Like
Yeah,
everyone is. It's
yeah.
it's blown up so much. It becomes such a great journalistic platform too. So totally understand
Mm-hmm.
that. Very cool. All right, let's move right along. So, what are some ways you build trust and credibility with your niche audience, and how does that turn into a real business impact? So we talked about engagement, we talked about lead gen, but like when do you see it in like real time? Aja, let's start with you.
Okay, this actually goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about, building
Beautiful.
trust and credibility through all of these different approaches, because people know what they're familiar with, but then also seeing, something new from our client is what is building that credibility over time, and makes them establish, this is a figure that I can go to as a catch-all, that they know what they're talking about in their industry, and then they have these connections and experiences, um, expert connections and experiences, what I was trying to say, in all of the kind of outside neighboring areas, and making sure that every single time that we do put their face in front of a camera or on the internet, that the content that is accompanying their presence is always quality and accurate, because um, our job is to promote them and make their audience and community better than it was before we got there. So that is something that we take really seriously, so that we aren't harming their image or, uh, their position as an industry leader if they're going to a conference, or, showing up in these associations that they're a part of, in different organizations, to make sure that everyone knows, that this is a different project that they're working on, that's still, just as important, and they're just as well versed in these other areas.
Makes sense to me. Gwendolyn?
Yeah, I mean, Audra, I think you have a great point about like accuracy and expertise, right? It's like those are the reasons why people are coming to us for this particular content instead of just like going through like Joe
Right.
Schmo on like a random social media account, right? It's interesting. So I was actually like talking about this recently with my editor about how it's so crucial to have like a kind of factual reporting, getting as many voices as we can into a story. Of course, sometimes when you're on deadline, you don't manage to get every single voice that you're trying to get into a quick 300 word hit on a, launch or something like that, right? But when we do have the time, which is thankfully fairly often, we're trying to get like, okay, we have this perspective from the scientist. What about this perspective from this investor? What if we can like an analyst or two to weigh in on this as well? And especially like being open to also like quoting critics of like a certain part of the industry that we're writing about. We write about a lot of kind of hot topic things, big pharma, drug pricing, all that good stuff, right? And I think when it comes to, our audience is a large part of, like what we gear ourselves to, but we also have to understand that a lot of the experts that we quote are also part of our audience. So we want to make sure that we're being mindful of that. Our readers, are signing up for our newsletters, and they're giving us that, first party data. And then the like other side of our business at Informa Tech Target is, kind of targeting their marketing for that kind of stuff. We don't do a whole lot of general ads and stuff like that. Our ads are very targeted to the specific companies and, like the industry that we cover, right? And so, we want to make sure that if we're showing them those ads that, like is part of that real business impact, that, they actually are tailored to who's in our readership, right? So we just kind of want to make sure that like, when we draw them in, we're as factual, as accurate, as well-rounded as possible. And then, when we're continuing to engage with them, we have that, similar strand of connection still.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Now, just quick follow-up to both of y'all. Just regarding this, do you get a lot of like external stakeholder feedback? Say you did like a feature about someone in like biopharma. You get like a lot of like, oh, you encapsulated the whole idea that I'm presenting to you perfectly. Do you get a lot of that, like, emails, phone calls, reviews, anything like that?
I would say the engagement from that aspect is usually, oh, this was great, we should do something further like down the line, which is great for me, because it's always content to be made, and then that's a new audience, of course, that we're trying to tap into. But yeah, it's kind of a win-win situation because then we have a new stakeholder, but most of the time, of course, when we're covering different industries, we aren't going to be, the most well-versed in every single one of them. So being able to collaborate with the people who are well-versed in those areas and who are then starting to invest in the content that we're putting out, and trying to elevate that because that's what they're passionate about, that's their wheelhouse, is something to lean into. And I think that kind of exists in every business, even outside of B2B journalism. But that's something that I run into once we kind of tap into a topic or an area of the business that hasn't had a lot of light shed on it. People are usually very quick they're like, finally someone's covering this, let's let's capitalize on this while we have the attention.
Of course.
Totally. Yeah, I was going to say, like I see this a lot happening with States of Play, which is the feature series I had mentioned earlier, where it's like, I'll write something, we'll feature 12 particularly interesting biotech companies that are either doing something new or the furthest along or the most well-funded in that space, right? And inevitably, I always get 4 or 5 emails afterward. They're like, this was great. We're glad you wrote about it. However, you left out our company. However, you should have included this. And it's like, okay, well, first off, I can't include every single company, right? You'd be reading, you'd be reading a list instead of reading journalism at that point. But I also think it's really interesting though to get that sort of feedback, because also sometimes some of the external stakeholders that you mentioned, Jameson, are like very protective of the way that they're mentioned, right? Or like very protective of like how you phrase a certain thing. Like I've literally quibbled about like proteins versus enzymes over email for like several like emails with a PR person, even though functionally, like in the case it was referring to, it was the same, right? And so, it's kind of stuff like that that's like, okay, I am showing to you that I trust you as a source, that I trust you in the audience. And yet it kind of seems to me like, okay, there's a gap here between like, why don't you trust the way that we're describing something? Why don't you trust us to tell the story as correctly as possible? Because I don't want to plagiarize the PR, that you might have sent over to us, or like the materials that you have used, because I want to be able to do my own original reporting that's as objective and factual as possible. So it's just something that's like an ongoing conversation, I think, in my line of work, at least.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I can relate to that well with the same way that like my whole journalism experience worked out. Because, even in sports, people were very like, you did a great job, but you missed this point,
But
you missed this stat,
Hmm. But
climate
yeah,
especially. Yeah, there's always something, right? But like
yeah.
it's important too, because then you just keep building that credibility with, your audience, even on social media in that regard, where you just keep building it up. The more, okay, you make a mistake, you fix it, boom, done, it's back to normal, and then you still keep going with that relationship. So yeah, totally agree with everything y'all have said. Let's move right on. All right. So have you adapted your storytelling for SEO, social media, or like a newsletter to grow your audience? Like, how have you done it? Can you take me through like a case study? I'll open up to Gwendolyn first.
Okay.
yeah, sure. Actually, when I first started at Biopharma Dive, one of the things I was tasked with was to create and launch our emerging biotech newsletter. So, we have our daily newsletter. We have a couple other newsletters that run weekly that are focused on specific aspects of the industry. But the one I was building is specific to venture capital and biotech startups and all the news that happens there, right? And so it was really interesting to think about, like, how do we target this particular sector of the audience that has started coming to Biopharma Dive for our coverage in this, but isn't completely hooked in yet, because we had a lot of competition from some of our other peers in the space. So one big way that we did that we kind of realized was missing from some of our other competitors in the space, the inclusion of more graphics and charts. Like, with the limited attention span that you get these days, like having that whole, like, okay, maybe you don't have the time to click into our database on IPOs, but you do have the time to skim this chart where we explain to you that a certain type of drug maker, maybe they're exclusively focused on cancer, has been getting most of the money generated in IPO proceeds this year and for the last 3 years or something like that. So realizing that this was underserved is really helpful. I mean, a lot of the ways that we think about how to best present our stories has obviously been focused on how people engage with this with SEO and social media. Like, we can't ignore the fact that those are really big factors these days, right? But particularly when it comes to social media, LinkedIn has been a really big focal point for us at Industry Dive as a whole over the last couple of years, because we realized that's when people talk about their work, their sectors, their industries. So we want to make sure that we're part of the conversation there and leading the conversation when we can.
Right. Totally get that. Aja, what about you?
Yeah. I would say the conversation has definitely shifted from just the service or whatever their 9 to 5 is, to their brand as the professional, at least in our approach, because we're working with the clients. Everyone that we work with is invested in building on what they do, and translating that into some other purpose, or even cross industries. They might be writing a book and also having a completely separate 9 to 5. So figuring out how to shift the focus from just one profession into the actual work and how that translates to different people's everyday lives. That's the shift in terms of adapting the actual storytelling. There's also a shift in adapting the media that we use to tell these stories. So figuring out a way to get their face in front of as many people as possible is definitely my key priority. And kind of what I was discussing earlier about being that catch-all, figuring
Mhm.
out a way that we can serve their audience in the different capacities that they need this content. So having a podcast whenever people are driving to work, or if they're, at home, instead of turning on the TV and watching a regular cable talk show, being able to tap into this podcast. People are interested in filling those everyday tasks that they would be doing anyways with something that's new, because people get bored very quickly. So that's one way that's, a little unorthodox compared to what we would have imagined, a few years ago. But not everyone is interested in listening to more content that's like very dense on their drive to work. So figuring out how those people, they might want something that's very, short and easy and surface level. They get what they need to get, and then they can move on with the rest of their day and their lives. So that's adapting kind of those channels that we reach people and making sure that we're serving their different needs so that they keep coming back to us for more than one reason, and for more than one type of content or piece of information.
Right. Yeah, the expansion of platforms and just having like a different approach for everyone is it's kind of paramount now from what I've noticed. I was print or digital, let's say, and then I never did podcast
Mhm.
work. But now, working in this role, you see how
Yeah.
many avenues people utilize just to not only get engagement, but just to get the news out. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. It has to be tailored approaches too, I would say. It's definitely correct. Great. Let's move right along. So we kind of touched on this earlier. Have you worked on sponsored content, native ads,
Mhm.
any other revenue growth oriented content? And working on this content, what did you learn? Let's start with Aja.
Yeah, so I actually started a few Substacks this year for clients. And those clients are the ones that are interested in traversing from just what they do 9 to 5 every day to the other avenues that they're either already working in some sort of organization or they're trying to boost their brand outside of what they do. And so figuring out other ways to draw revenue is very important when they're trying to build because you need that sort of support when you need the funding and more eyes and engagement to be able to successfully switch over from one avenue that people know you as to another. And those collaborations with other businesses is also very important, which is it's very interesting to see how people navigate that in smaller local markets because there's a lot of advantages in this collaboration aspect that you wouldn't have to approach in the same way as traditional advertising because both parties are interested in gaining something from the other. So it's very teamwork oriented,
Hmm.
which the community loves because they they use all of these people in different capacities. So it's kind of a win-win, which I know not every aspect of B2B journalism gets to benefit from that reality, but that's something that I really try to lean into to figure out, if there's another lawyer that's got a lot of attention and people resonate with them or feel somehow attached to them in their city and figuring out, what are the ways that we can kind of tap into their market and vice versa, and make all of them seem more charming and lovable and person next door, that sort of community leader as well as just their industry leader is another way to build that support and kind of latent advertising.
Interesting. Gwendolyn, what about you?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but there's kind of a firewall between us and the advertising sponsored content side. So nobody at Editorial at Industry Diet and Pharma Tech Target works on sponsored content. We have a separate kind of division called Studio ID that handles all that stuff. They do great work. But we still kind of have ways that we contribute to doing that kind of work for the business side. Like we think about like what are those editorial opportunities, right? Like webinars, like I mentioned earlier, we always try to host like 1 or 2 a year that dive into topics that our readership might be interested in engaging with further and hearing directly from the sources, the experts that we quote otherwise, right? And we also have something called trend lines, which are kind of like gathering together a lot of the notable articles, information, and packaging it all in one place where our readers can access it, right? So, it's great for lead generation. We get their emails. We also, find out the roles. So of the people that are, signing up, handing over that first party data to us. So, suddenly I know, okay, it's a VP at a major pharma company, or, oh, the CEO and the CSO of a biotech startup are engaging with our content. And it makes me go, okay, if this is the high level, type of reader that I'm trying to engage with, and this is the content that's getting them to engage with us, then maybe we should be, doing more of it, right?
Hmm.
So that's as far as I can tell you, at least about what the editorial strategy is on that.
No, it paints a good picture. It really does. And it's interesting that you say first party data and like its value, because that was the very big theme that we talked about in our webinar in July. And like also going to Aja's point about the teamwork idea of that, kind of how you put like the data team and your content creators and how they just kind of work together to make that sort of like the lead gen happen, they drive the engagement, that sort of thing. So yeah, both great points you have both raised about that. Let's move right along. So a big thing with, revenue generating content is, how do you protect editorial integrity while you're supporting the revenue generation process? And I know this is kind of gets into like, how AI can be used for like some of these like, listicles is a big one that I've seen a lot just in like our interactions with executives through SIA. So I'll throw it to Aja for this one first. So how do you sort of protect that like integrity, even on social media? Like, how do you do it?
Yeah. So one of the approaches that I had when I was founding Vault 29 was to make sure that we were mixing social media with the journalism pillars instead of traditional marketing pillars. So we actually work with other marketing experts who help champion um, the other aspects of marketing and sales so that we can focus on this sort of integral content creation. And our job isn't to constantly sell the client that we're working with. Our job is to disseminate the information and the expertise that this person has, which of course then translates into them getting sales because people are engaging with them and trusting them later. But that's not, what our primary focus is. Um, I think we have a chat too.
Yes, we do.
So yeah, awesome. But I think that's something that we figured out early on to kind of separate the two, which is kind of what Gwendolyn was explaining about having the separate ad versus content creation departments.
Right. Uh, let's go to Gwendolyn, then we'll take Debbie's question.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, firewall. Actually, when it's a conversation specifically with sales, that's what our lead editors are usually in charge of. So they're the ones who are the only people from our like kind of editorial side that ever engage with the sales side, and they're kind of set by like the managing editor, editor in chief about what they can discuss, what they can't discuss. I mean, like I don't know who our ad clients are, which is probably for the better, right? It doesn't influence the type of journalism that I do. I still feel free to, write stuff that's factual, objective, and if that is critical of someone who ends up being an ad client of us, then like so be it. And I do think it's for the better because I don't ever want that to be, constraint on me because then that moves away from journalism and into marketing and public relations at that point, right? And I want to stay firmly in the journalism side of things.
Right. Yeah, that makes complete sense. Like you don't want to like completely like let go of like the standards that you built, not only for the company, but for yourself, right?
Right.
Cool. So Debbie R asks, as journalists, do you see company or industry experts are, quote, more available with product or company news? Is this a current or old challenge? From company viewpoints, we see more pressure to directly tie outcomes. Whoever wants to answer first, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start. I think it's an interesting question because obviously I get a lot of embargoed news releases, a lot of like, hey, we're promoting this particular drug that's launched, or like we're breaking ground on a new facility happening in this place. So and so expert is available to speak. And I have a tendency to take those, but I'm always very clear and upfront. There's no guarantee that I'm going to write a story based off of this conversation. If I do, I'm not going to sit here and like check every single line I write with the company, right? So it's interesting because it feels sometimes like it sets you up to butt heads with, someone on the public relations, on the marketing side of things. But I think a good, healthy relationship between a journalist and a public relations expert understands that, we're both just doing our jobs and PR is representing the company. I am representing my news outlet when I'm doing this kind of work, right? Thankfully though, it hasn't been a challenge as far as getting access to certain investors, or like certain company experts. If I reach out to them later on down the line and I'm like, hey, I'm just catching up to see, would you be willing to talk about what the current goals for the company are or something like that? They understand that it's not like going to be a short-term outcome for them, that immediately they're going to get a story out of this, right? But also, if I'm working on a longer term story and then I go, hey, I had a great conversation with this industry expert I never ended up writing anything out of that conversation, but I think that the conversation laid the groundwork for a future conversation that might end up getting quoted. This company might end up getting mentioned, then so be it. I think a lot of my best reporting has come out of maintaining and cultivating those relationships with industry experts. And, kind of my hope is that when I engage with a marketing or PR expert, that helps me get access to those industry experts, that they understand that as well.
Interesting. Aja?
Yeah. Everyone that I've worked with has made themselves very available. In terms of what the interaction is once I'm engaging with them or writing these stories, it differs. I think it depends on how present they are, or I guess how much they have to serve the general public versus their own sort of agencies. Those people are less forthcoming, which makes sense because they have their own stakeholders that they're trying to navigate and not stir the waters too much. But for the most part, everyone is very helpful in terms of making content and connecting with one another. My agency works with different professionals across different industries, so they aren't competing with one another. So that's one aspect that makes it really helpful for me, because they all kind of depend on one another for some rhyme or reason. And if they aren't working together now, there's a potential that they will need each other in the future. So people are very eager to make those connections with me. So it's like a mutual beneficial collaboration, even if I'm not working directly with them. Um, let's see, is this a current or an old challenge? I actually think that it's becoming much easier to work with other people, and other people are making themselves more available. I think, especially in the world of social media, it's because there is so much content and so many people who are on these platforms that you have to form these alliances, if you will, in order to break through the surface. So people are, for their own benefit, very helpful. And like you're saying, Gwendolyn, want to kind of push whatever they're working on in their own spheres. Um, yeah, pressure directly to the outcomes. I would agree with the last part also. That's something that I've seen and experienced. But again, because my work isn't held down to one area of business or industry, or content that we're making, I think that alleviates a lot of pressure, at least from my work and perspective. Um,
Actually, Audrey, you mentioned that, and it made me think of, just kind of like, would I rather have the more meaningful engagement, from an industry expert later on versus like a really boilerplate quote in a story that doesn't get as many views. But if I include them because we've cultivated that relationship later on, they've given me good insight that goes into a bigger piece. It's like, well, would you rather your company, be mentioned here, but you only got like 50, 200 page views because this product news, frankly, wasn't very interesting to our reader base. Versus like if I quote them for a general trend story, where sure, maybe there's a mention of a product or a particular bit of company news in there, but it's their greater insight that you can't already get because you've logged on to read the press release on a company's website, but that one gets 5,000 views instead. Then, like, to me, it makes more sense to be willing to invest in that kind of long-term source cultivation, as well as, better understanding that, okay, maybe you don't get the 50 views right now, the 50 views on this product news, but you get those 5,000 views later on mentioning the company and the, particular product gets a mention in passing, but more people have seen it. Well, to me, it makes more sense to kind of invest in that.
mhm.
Definitely. Great answers all around. Let's move on to our next question. Thank you for the question, Debbie, by the way. Okay, so the modern journalist needs a very multifaceted approach, from my understanding. In your opinions, what skills do B2B journalists need today to contribute meaningfully to revenue growth? Let's start with Gwendolyn.
Yeah. I think being willing to move away from the traditional 800-word article, right? We have a lot of people who are still really married to this idea that, it has to be a very strict webinar, a very specific like 800-word piece that explains all these different things. When in reality, a lot of the most meaningful engagement we get is on like newer products. Our databases being a really big example of that. You know, people are really engaging with when we put charts into our newsletters or have new interactive ways for them to look at the data that we've collected because, and I hear this a lot from people who read our website or engage with content on our website, that they can't find this information anywhere else. So we're really trying to think like, okay, ultimately being a B2B journalist is about being a service journalist, right? Like it's a really big, like hot topic that's come up in a lot of J schools, you know, in a lot of modern talking about media, but we have to think about what is the specific service that we're providing them that they can't get anywhere else. So if that means, hey, we have this data in one place that's easy for you to read, for you to engage with, then like, great, I'm accomplishing what I set out to do as a service journalist.
No, I couldn't agree more with that. You got to be flexible when it comes to just developing that skill set. Couldn't agree more. Aja, what about you?
I was the first two that came to mind skills of being a good researcher and being innovative, but flexibility is also very important. I think that's a great word for the other aspect that I was thinking of. Especially in B2B, you're not talking to an audience that's just happy to be there. um, that is their livelihood.
Right.
And, you know, they will know if you're not up to par. And if that's the case, then like you said, you're definitely not about to be making any sort of revenue. You're gonna go out of
Yeah.
business.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to be on the top of your game in terms of research, because every industry is changing, journalism as well as every other, you know, aspect of our society is shifting. I know we were laughing about AI changing journalism, but AI is changing, you know, every aspect. I was just collaborating with a information systems company based out of Baton Rouge, and AI is completely taking over the way that their HR is functioning. So being able to be flexible and adaptive, and then the innovation aspect comes into how are you effectively communicating what you've just kind of tapped into, because you could be at the top of your game and still not know how to actually connect with your audience, and at that point, you know, it's useless. So being able to balance all of those as well, I think, is the top 4 or 5 skills I would say a B2B journalist needs to have today.
Those are definitely the top 4 or 5 that they should have. I couldn't agree more, especially the research parts, because I know a lot of people not in the journalism field, but they love to use GPTs to like do Google search essentially now, and I worry about that a little bit, because it's not the most accurate. It's just
Yeah.
it tries and you can teach it, but it doesn't always give you what it wants, and I've experienced that just in weird like personal usage of it. Like I tried to name a sports lineup and it wouldn't get it right, so like the research part is a big thing, and I definitely think the modern B2B journalist definitely needs to like hone that and just keep working on it. Like it doesn't end once you're done with J school, and it definitely doesn't end once you finish the story. You just got to keep working on it. So couldn't agree more. Moving on to our last few questions. So opportunities everywhere. Where do you see the biggest opportunities for editorial teams and social media teams to influence revenue in the next 2 to 3 years? You think it's in data, AI, custom personalization, something else? Let's start with Aja.
Okay. I actually think AI is going to have a little less influence than we've thought in the several uh, previous years, because I think everyone is starting to view AI as a sort of enemy and moving away from that in some regards. And I think that the beauty of that is bringing AI back to just being a tool instead of being the head honcho of how we
Mm-hmm.
navigate our professional and personal lives. So I think figuring out how to use those tools is going to be a huge opportunity for us to kind of swing the pendulum back in the other direction. Because one aspect that I see from AI is this sort of excitement that it's brought back to people to actually do their research. even though they think that, chat GTP is maybe the most accurate and it ends there. I think that there's an opportunity to tap into people's interest to figure out these answers, instead of just, it's made life a lot easier to translate into these different areas and arenas that they wouldn't care or be researching on their own. So figuring out how to identify ourselves as journalists and editors as the point person for this information as opposed to a computer, I think is going to draw those eyes and engagement and sales and revenue back to this sort of traditional form of journalism in the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, good point about being the point person for that. That couldn't agree more. Gwendolyn, sorry, Gwendolyn, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I was so ready to come into this, be like, not to sound like a Luddite, but I don't think it's AI. But I think Aja is actually a perfect jumping off point for how I feel about this too, which is that people increasingly are choosing who they engage with, as far as content on, whether they can provide a valuable service to them, right? And I think it's something that is, rooted as much in, the people that I engage with when I'm working on a story, who I interview, as much as it is like in my own personal life, because I think about, my friends, my fiance, like when they talk about like a particular brand that they're engaging with, they're like, we have loyalty to this because they are an expert on this, not because like they use the flashiest new technology or anything like that, but like I really enjoy watching this YouTube creator because they've had a proven track record over the last 7 years of being the first and the most accurate to deliver this particular bit of technology news or something like that. So I think there's a way we can transpose that into the businesses that we help run, right? So it's like building that kind of unique, very personal, very direct relationship with readers, trying to get that habit of them coming back. I know when I update a tracker, update a database, and then I promote that we've updated that tracker and database, that the same readers are coming back and engaging with it again, because they're like, I want to learn what's new. I have a vested interest in what's coming back here. And so it's like, if I'm getting that level of engagement, if our business side is noticing and tracking that these people are returning, and they have a habit of coming back to our brand for that kind of news, then like absolutely we should try and monetize that, use that to drive revenue growth where we can.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. And quick follow-up for the personalization part. I read an article, I forget exactly where, that a lot of companies are considering using more like interactive content in like their newsletters, say like a quiz. Do you think that would help kind of with the revenue influence?
I would say definitely. Something that Gwendolyn was just talking about. People like feeling like experts because it makes them, feel invested in the material. They feel like they have a stake in whatever they're learning about, and then also being able to turn around and teach it to someone else. People like to feel good about themselves in that regard. So being able to help integrate them into your content as much as possible, I think is a huge opportunity to personalize the data and then to convert them into those sort of internal customers. Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Gwendolyn?
Yeah, I mean, you actually mentioned this, and it made me think about an interaction I had with an account executive at a PR agency who was talking about how, she always sends like, the daily write-up, the roundup of like where their clients are mentioned, but also like other news that they should be keeping track of, and that she enjoys including Biopharma Dive in there because that's the particular site I direct my clients to when I'm like, you need to read this analysis of this thing. You need, like, sure, this other peer, or this other competitor of our website, might be super first every single time, or like, cover every little development in product news. But like this one is, Biopharma Dive is particularly important because they have a good lay of the land that you should be reading, right? And it's like, okay, that's the kind of quality engagement that I am trying to build. And, if that means that you're more likely to give me a particular industry expert that no one else has access to, then that relationship has worked itself out in the end, trying to really tailor ourselves to like, how do we fill a specific niche for the audience that we're trying to reach rather than trying to cover every single thing under the sun.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's possible to do that. But like I think that, if a more tailored approach for every reader is good. Obviously, it can't be like every single reader you have, but I do agree that having a little bit more personalization is definitely key, especially now. All right, we're going to move on to our last question. This is another opinion. So, why should someone starting out in journalism become a B2B reporter or content creator? A very loaded question, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Gwendolyn, let's start with you.
Oh man, no, I'm kidding. It's funny. I was actually just talking about this with some of the students at Medill. Shout out to APEC, who's in the audience and brought me to Evanston earlier this year. But I was having a really interesting conversation with some of the undergraduate and graduate students who were asking me about this particular thing, because I know a lot of journalism students start out going like, I want to go work for the New York Times. I want to be a foreign correspondent. I'm going to travel to Brazil to write about that, right? Don't worry, I've been there. But I kind of came to realize that it's very fulfilling to work in this particular niche audience, kind of journalism, because I can directly see what the impact of my reporting is, right? Like I can see that like I am helping, either maybe it's a small biotech business, like get up off the ground. And in turn, that means, okay, like they're discovering a cure for a disease or a better way to manage a chronic condition that hasn't existed before because they, have been covered extensively by journalists like me, right? So the ability to have that kind of direct influence and influence on good is really, I think, helpful for me and kind of is my North Star in why I continue to do the B2B work, that I do, but also frankly, like it's a very stable, great part of the media industry, and I feel like some of the best mentors that I have had in the field of journalism have come from B2B, trade publication backgrounds, because they're very familiar with like when it's appropriate to slow down and do that deeper dive and do that good boots on the ground journalism that maybe we didn't get the chance to do necessarily in like daily digital content creation.
Yeah, totally agree. What about you, Aja?
I think it's a win-win. Exactly like Gwendolyn was saying, it's rewarding to be able to make an impact in so many different industries and know that you're helping other people, but also it's rewarding to yourself. If you're someone that just might get bored with one kind of mundane aspect of life. Sometimes journalism does become a little mundane when you're covering one beat. So being able to be so flexible and cover, in some instances, many different industries, because B2B is such a intersection of content and industries. And different types of professionals, we, even if we are working in the same industry, won't be doing or fulfilling the same purpose. So that's something that you kind of get to benefit from everyone else that you're working around. You get to tap into what they're doing and fill in that role for a few weeks or a few months, or maybe you're working with a political official for a particular story and seeing how that sphere navigates itself is really rewarding. And then when you're ready to move on to something else and another task or fight to overcome, then you can. So I think that it's rewarding to self and other people. And then again, the stability, exactly like Gwendolyn was saying, there's always going to be a need for you to fill that role in a way that other surface level content might not always be consistently needed.
Yeah, no, I'm motivated now. Those are great answers. Seriously, very cool stuff. That's pretty much all the questions I have. Time to open it up to the audience. You guys have any? Drop them in the chat. See what happens.
And now we wait.
And now we wait. Now we'll give it like 2
We're
minutes.
about our work and all the other stuff with like self promo, but I if there are questions from the audience, we will take them.
Yes, indeed. Let's see. If not, it's all good. Yeah, it doesn't. Let's see. Well, hmm. It doesn't look like we're gonna have any, but that's okay. All right. Well, this was great all around. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. It was so much fun. I hope everyone in the audience learned a lot. I certainly did. Content creators are vital in B2B, and they're only going to become they're only become more valuable, as we talked about AI, as that comes around, we still need the human touch. And I think the idea of personalizations and just having sort of like someone who really is good with just interacting with people and keeping all the stakeholders involved, that's what y'all do, and it's fantastic work, and I hope we continue it. So this might be something we talk further about at BIMS 2026. Everyone in the audience and our panelists, save the day for that as well. That's February 2 to 3, 2026. We're going to be back at the Ritz-Carlton in New Orleans. So we hope to see
Yay.
everybody there. Yeah, it's going to be right in your neighborhood again, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. I'm excited to go back. It'll be a fun time. We're going to talk
Yeah.
about some cool stuff. But yeah, that's going to be it for today. So thank you, our panelists and audience members. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you.
us.
Of course.
Bye.
Take care, y'all. Bye.
Bye.